iPhone that is so much more amazing than my first computer that I could actually literally take apart. I cannot take apart an iPhone.
But they can't put together nitrogenase molecules.
Yeah, so my group works on superconducting qubits, and I think many of you this weekend will probably program a superconducting quantum computer, a small one, from IBM using Qiskit. And so these superconducting qubits are basically electrical circuits. They're resonators. And the one feature of them, though, is that when you cool them down to very low temperatures, they sort of behave like atoms in the sense that they have discrete energy levels. So they're quantum mechanical. And of course, in quantum computing, we tend to use the ground state and the first excited state. We call that a qubit. What my group's working on primarily, I'd say, are a couple directions. One is, why doesn't that thing work better? What's preventing it from being like a natural atom? Like, Ike works with natural atoms, ions, and they have lifetimes that are so long, hours, maybe, even longer. But our superconducting circuits, their lifetimes are maybe 100 microseconds. What's limiting that? Why can't it be longer? Well, we've solved many of those problems over the years. We have more to go. 20 years ago, it was a nanosecond. And today, it's 100 microseconds or more. And it comes down to materials, fabrication, how you design that circuit. It all matters, as you might imagine. Everything matters. So one thrust of the group is trying to make these qubits better and better and better, because if they have higher coherence, that tends to lead to higher fidelity, and that's really what you want. It's how many of these gates can I apply to my quantum computer before it starts to fall apart and lose the quantum information. The second part of the group focuses on larger circuits. Like, we have a 16-qubit chip, 21-qubit chip, and what we're trying to do there is study entanglement, primarily, manifestations of entanglement. How does entanglement start? How does it propagate? When it propagates, how do I benchmark that complicated entanglement state? Sometimes people call it many-body localization or many-body entanglement. I don't know that we have many bodies yet. Maybe FBE is better, few-body entanglement. It's 16, 20, something like that. But even at that scale, it's very complicated to understand how it's working and how to benchmark. It's very expensive, as you'd imagine, because one of the hallmarks of quantum computing is that as you increase the number of qubits, it gets exponentially more complex, exponentially larger state space. And so benchmarking even 16 or 20 qubits, while possible, is very, very challenging. Yeah, so those are the kinds of research directions we do. Maybe the last thing that's interesting, and a recent paper we had, was we coupled a superconducting molecule, so 2 qubits that were entangled, to a waveguide. And based on the entanglement we created, we could have that artificial molecule emit a photon to the left by choice or to the right by choice. And in the jargon of the field, we'd say this is chiral. It's a chiral or directional photon emission. The reason that's interesting is if we didn't play that trick and the photons just emitted, it actually goes in both directions until we detect it and then you resolve it. But it's 50-50 which way it goes. But by being able to choose which direction it goes, we can now connect modules, small-scale processors, together, processor A to processor B, or let's do processor C instead, just by choosing which way the photon goes. And so that's a recent paper that we just had. And now we're working on catching the photon. We know how to emit it, now we want to catch it.
I'm curious, based on your last question, how many of you here are here because you're inspired by doing a cool science project with quantum computing? How many of you are here because you're inspired by making quantum computers useful for mankind to solve problems like the excited state of nitrogenase? Actually, it's about half-half, or maybe the second half was shy about answering that question after Donna. But Will, you mentioned these IBM processors that are based on what you've built.
Yeah.
How will these folks in the audience be able to tell this weekend whether IBM's actually letting them use their processor or if they're simulating them with a classical computer behind the scenes?
Well, that's a really good question. I think you said a bit. And which way you set it, 0 or 1, it's going to send it to either the simulator or the quantum computer. But you could do benchmarking yourself. And I would encourage you to do that, is benchmark your quantum computers, right? And you can run your algorithm, whatever it is. Algorithm could be generic, doesn't have to be solving a specific problem. A sequence of gates is an algorithm, and you could benchmark that quantum computer and look for the reality that you get out. A real quantum computer is going to have errors, and you will see those errors.
You're saying the real quantum computer sucks compared with the classical computer?
Well, I didn't quite go that far, but the real quantum computer today, if you look at IBM's quantum computers, which are at the forefront or close to the forefront, they have what's known as quantum volumes, and basically what that is how many qubits can I run for how many steps? And there's an algorithm that does that, but it's basically, can I do 3 qubits for 3 steps before I lose it, 4 qubits for 4 steps, 5 for 5, et cetera. And whatever that number is, that's your quantum volume. And to make it sound bigger, they'll take 2 to that number, so 2 to the 5th or 2 to the 6th. And the quantum volumes today are around 7 or 8 qubits. I can run 7 qubits for a depth of 7 gates. And on the one hand, you'd say, I wish I had more, because we want to have more, right? And that's what research I'm doing and many others is let's make those qubits better so we can get more. On the other hand, from the perspective of someone who's been in the field for 20 years, I'd say, wow, that's pretty darn good, because I remember when we started, it wasn't even 1. It was probably 0. So you will use, this is, I think, very exciting, is that you're going to use a quantum computer, a small-scale quantum computer, whether it's IBM's or IonQ's or whoever's it is. You're here at the very beginning, right? We're just getting to the point where we can really online access a quantum computer, run an algorithm, get some results out, compare it to what the simulator told us we should get. And for many of the algorithms you write, you'll see that those line up, right? To answer your question, though, like, how do you tell the difference? Let's say that the quantum volume is 7. Try 10, because the simulator will tell you what that answer is for 10, and it will be the answer to the problem you're posing or trying to solve. But on the real quantum computer, it won't look as good. And the more complexity you add, either more qubits or more depth, the less and less it will look like that simulated result.
Sadly today, but maybe it'll change. Maybe that's why you're here, because there's hope for better in the future.
Indeed.
But not quite yet.
Not yet. But we can do real things. We can have hackathons.
And we can do really awesome science today, but not quite yet do something useful.
Or commercial, maybe.
Commercially useful.
Yes,
That sounds like a great segue to Sloan School.
I don't think we can reorder things that much. Quantum matrices, when you multiply them in different ways, they give different results.
Okay, I will take the privilege of being elderly to skip and come back at the end.
Well, that hierarchy sounds right to me, that you can pull rank. At the research group, the IDE, the Initiative of Digital Economy, we look at all kinds of technologies and how they impact the economy. One way to think about this is around timescales, because when we're looking at technologies that have been out there for quite a while, we could look at how they're impacting the total economy. So not just even the US economy, but global trade and lots of other nations. So if you look at the silicon chip revolution, that's out there everywhere, and we can see it in productivity, and we can see it in labor markets, and we can see it possibly even in things like inequality in the economy. And there are a lot of other very interesting technologies that are so well deployed across the total economy that that's the aperture that we look at them. But something like quantum computing is not in the economy today. It has no measurable impact whatsoever. So what lens are we going to use to have a look at this? Obviously, it raises a whole bunch of very different questions and very different things that we should be looking at. We try to add as much precision as we can to the discussion. We think that's important here at MIT. especially, obviously, we're a social science, and when you're dealing with social scientists, things are more probabilistic than deterministic. So we're trying to look at quantum computing and be precise about where it might have a fundamental impact on something economic. So let me give you an example. When the internal combustion engine came along, it enabled a dramatic drop in the cost of transportation. So having to go somewhere on a bicycle is very expensive, with time, and now you can drive large distances in your car. So it makes sense. So travel was disrupted enormously at the economic level. You could look at loads of other examples, such as maybe search engines with Google. Previously, you had to go to a library and do some physical searching, and Google made it basically free and instant and perfect. We need to understand what, in the economy, quantum computing is going to have the similar effect for. It's not entirely obvious right now, but the more precise we can be about it, the better informed we can have decisions or discussions around, is it going to impact chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's a really big question that we can look at in places like the Sloan School. And it will enable us to have a much better foundation when we start making discussions about predictions of what impact it's going to have. So trying to get all the way down and working closely with the likes of yourselves in this room helps us better inform that.
Can I try a question about that, though? He didn't sound very excited about this. Given your resource modeling, and given the fact that resources are constrained, you all in the audience can't simultaneously be working on 5 different projects, or maybe you can, but it's not as easy. Would a student here be better off working on quantum computing, fusion, or high-temperature superconductivity? Not to equate them in any way.
Yeah, easy question. I know the answer to that. No, of course. I think that I wouldn't be making a decision across those 3 choices based on your potential to get rich. Mm-hmm. If you're going to enter a field like the things you're discussing, you have to have a love for them, because it's going to take a long time, decades, for any of the topics that you've talked about, before you get rich or have an impact, and expect that you're going to go through peaks and troughs, amongst your family and friends when they ask you what you're doing. Yes, you're very cool today because you're doing quantum computers, but that might not always be the case. So unless you have the passion for it, I wouldn't be picking the decision based on where I think the jobs are going to be, or necessarily where I think I'm going to start the next company and become the next Bill Gates. But I will say it lends itself, that question, into another area that's a big, I would say, question amongst business people who are looking at this, which is there's a lot of excitement, and rightly so, about quantum computing today. Okay, I can see it in the room, and the people I talk to at conferences, it's brilliant to see. But there's a wider group in this community of stakeholders, of investors, governments, large corporations, who are all getting involved. And it's an interesting business question as to how a field is going to maintain an appropriate, that's a difficult word, right? But an appropriate level of excitement about the field, without it oscillating between overexcitement in winters and up and down and everything in between. And yet there's no overlord in control of all of this excitement levels where we can just move it up and down. So how is this field, which offers so much potential, going to make sure that it's able to ride the wave sufficiently?
And get a soft landing.
Yeah, well, I would hope that it'll be a very exciting landing, but the journey and the stakeholder expectations are going to be an important part of this. And I think we, at places like the Sloan School, can add to that understanding.
Wait, I've got to ask one more question about that. Has there ever been an emerging technology of such high impact potential which did not oscillate up and down many cycles.
I think that the oscillation is amplified today. And it's been juiced because we have access to enhanced financial markets. And that juices everything that you're seeing in terms of expectations, in terms of the bets being made and blah, and blah, 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 blah. So I think that all major technologies take decades to move from a lab through to really having an impact on the economy. Just adding loads of money, which is what it's not all we're doing at the moment, we do lots of it at the moment, doesn't always help. And I will say one other thing to this community. Technology adoption is a complicated business. Let me give you you probably all assume as soon as we build a quantum computer, okay, not that simple, but as soon as we do, surely industry will just take us up on it. You might have noticed that's not always the case. You might have noticed I've got an Irish accent. I go over and back across the Atlantic on a regular basis. I would love to take the Concorde, but it's not available to me. Yet there's a technology that would make my life better. There's lots of complicated social and economic and business model reasons why technologies flourish or sit on shelves. And we want to make sure that quantum computing is being supported to make sure that the best results for our communities can be realized.
Does that mean that you are in favor of like the VC economy and the drive that they push to move the derivatives up and down faster so that they can ride the waves?
Well, you could look at it I tend to support it, that it's not a perfect system, but it still, I think in a lot of cases, I don't believe in total free market, unregulated, everything, blah, blah, blah. But I think in a lot of situations, it can be very helpful, but it depends on the subject area,
Yeah. Should I ask you one more question?
I mean, I feel like, I doubt the audience came to listen to me, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, okay, Dirk, with apologies to you, just one last thing. How many billions of dollars do you think it will take quantum to make it become real?
Do you not think you should have gone to the other side to ask Will actually wants the check.
To mention, I definitely encourage folks to discuss, and if, for example, Will wanted to answer that question, you're more than welcome to.
Or maybe you'd like to.
And Ike is certainly
like a few billion yourself.
I would absolutely love a few billion, but I'm not going to promise I'll have a working quantum computer in a few years.
But it's probably going to be billions. You didn't laugh at my question.
It definitely is billions.
Yeah.
I would say T.
Yeah,
I would say it's $1 trillion or more. Hey, we think back to the last century, right, and how semiconductor classical computers, conventional, right? They hate it when we say classical. So conventional computers developed. And think of all the investment that went into that. And ask yourself, when did we have a conventional computer? What day did that happen? Because we often get asked, when are we going to have a quantum computer? Okay, well, when did we have a conventional computer? It's very hard to pinpoint the date because you have to say, well, what type of conventional computer? Do you mean an abacus? Do you mean a mechanical computer? Do you mean a vacuum tube computer? Do you mean something that could add two numbers together? Or do you mean an iPhone, right? When did it happen? And of course, the reality is that it evolved over several decades of time. Transistor was invented in '47 at Bell Labs. But here we are today making multi-core processors with what? M2 has now 100 billion transistors on it. That's still the technology, and that's, 7 decades or more.
Trillions.
And trillions of dollars, with an S even now. So it's going to take a lot of money, but it is beginning, and it is unfolding now. Now, will we have full at-scale quantum computers commercialized to the same level as our conventional computers today? Is it the next information processing revolution? I don't think we can answer that today. I don't think we know, right?
Dirk or Ike, if you'd like to tell us about the...
But I can say something to that question.
Oh, yeah, please.
In my lab, I'll bring it back to the M's, maybe in terms of money rather than the T's. Although it's kind of scary, yeah. I guess the thing that drives me is that I'm convinced that in some time in the future, maybe it's the end of this decade, maybe it's by 2050 or so, we will do many things in different ways than we do today. We will build machines that are able to encode information, process information on the single particle level. And there's really interesting things that happen there, whether it's, you call that sort of semi-classical or fully quantum computing. This is the physics of computing, which is a term that Ike likes to use as well. And that I think is a good example of, we have a renaissance in computing, right? You no longer go the sort of just, make transistors smaller and get more on the chip and so on. No, there's a need to think bigger, think differently. And I do believe that in the future we will compute and process information in new ways, and that's sort of like the major goal, the goalpost. Actually, even when you think about what people say analog computers, what really does it mean for a computer to be analog? Think about just the word itself is often misunderstood. Ultimately, when we make a measurement, as far as I know in physics, it's every single measurement is actually a discrete number. It's not some like arbitrary continuous number. It's a discrete number, right? So there's a lot that we can learn and maybe use that's not the quantum computing in the sense that we think about today, perhaps, but there's many forms of computing with physics. And I think that's sort of like the driving goal. Just very concretely, we work on technology to control quantum computers, like large-scale optical systems, to control with our collaborators in the Center for Ultra-Cold Atoms, to control large numbers of neutral atoms that are laser-cooled. I think QEra is the company that's part of this hackathon. So we're looking to build the controllers for those. And so it's a big goal, and like in some sense, maybe one would shy away from this. Oh my God, it's going to be $1 trillion to build it. But my experience has been when you set a big goalpost and you make an incremental advance towards that big goal, it's much more impactful than having a home run on an incremental problem in the first place. And that's like in my lab when we try to build the hardware to control 10 million qubits or so. It is really hard to do, but you know you're going in the right direction, and there's discoveries along the way. One of them being that we learned how to process information just purely optically, and to make new like machine learning accelerators that actually might have are a good example of how you can use physics in a new way to make useful computing machines. And that led to a startup, Light Matter, that's now taken on Intel and NVIDIA and so on to make super fast machine learning machines. So big message for me has been take something, an important problem, no matter how hard it is, work your way towards it, and in doing so, there's a lot of interesting problems that you have to solve along the way. And in that way, actually, I was just looking at everybody here, I have some project in common with each of you guys. We talked about optical control recently. We have some dilution refrigerator experiments going on together on quantum transduction. We're working on, I hope that Dana succeeds in building new kinds of qubits that would make the physical layer better. I'd like to talk to you about a project we recently started on quantifying the utility of quantum internet that we termed the quantum network utility. It's a market-based argument for performance metric. And so, like, when you have a big problem, there's so many different parts that have to come together. You find yourself discovering new areas of science and technology and lots of interesting people. And that's been great for me. So, and I think my group altogether would agree that it's a fun place to be in.
Take a poll. How many think I should ask Dirk a question? Oh no. How many think I should go ahead and just say something on my own spiel?
Wait,
No
I want the
hands.
option for
no
both.
hands.
I want the option for both.
Go ahead.
I want the option for both.
Oh gosh, everything.
You have two hands?
Yeah.
For both too.
Well, Dirk, you mentioned two very different sectors, light matter and the machine learning optical computing. By the way, how many of you ever heard of optical computing before? Yeah? Do you know, so I worked as an undergraduate here 30 years ago. I went to Bell Labs and worked in the optical computing department at Homedale. And I saw my boss go off on ABC Nightly News on television, if you've ever heard of what that is, and say to the world, at that time the world did watch TV, that their electrical computers were going to be replaced by optical computers with photons going through the circuits and no more electrons because it was faster, it was lower power, it was much more capable of instantaneous matrix multiplication.
Oh.
What happened? I went to meetings just like this with all of you optical computing enthusiasts sitting in the audience. What happened? The field crashed and burned. And then turned into a telecommunication revolution, which has changed the world, but in a completely different way than expected. So, Dirk, how would you compare and contrast your quantum controllers effort with the two amazing startups you've already spun off, like Light Matter on machine learning? Which one is going to have higher impact? Which one do you believe more in? Which one are you more excited about for the students today?
I don't pick any favorites amongst
children.
So I think I don't have anything against electrons. I don't have anything against photons or for photons. I think they're all great because it is true that people in the 1980s already recognized the potential of optics in computing. It takes Fourier transforms automatically. It does do matrix multiplication ultra fast at the speed of light, and you can do many fascinating things with it. And then came the electrons and CMOS scaling and so on, worked terribly well. But I strongly believe in reasoning things through from first principles. So don't let the past failure of this or that dissuade you. Like, why didn't it work? It didn't have a fundamental reason it didn't work, if you look through it. So a lot of people say, oh, optical computing, it can't work. And I think Ike said it sort of, to inspire some conversation here, right?
Yes.
And people say, oh, it's been tried. Well, electric cars had been tried in 1880. I think one of the first automobiles, some of the first automobiles were electric. I think maybe the first.
Yeah.
And Mercedes-Benz came along, developed a combustion engine, and perhaps unfortunately they took off. But now we see a resurgence of electric cars. It was never a bad idea to make electric cars. The technology had to be right, and things are lots, like there's randomness, right, in technology and in society. And so, but we can hope that generally we go in the right direction. Hope. So optical computing has a lot of inherent things going for it. Like you can compute at a ridiculously low energy consumption. And which one is going to be more impactful? I don't know. I have really no idea. And I don't think about it that way. I'm not placing bets. I do it because it's fun. And as long as it's exciting and we can learn something, I'm very happy to invest my time in it. I guess one thing I would say about the quantum computing, the way I would describe it there is I invest my time into it because, on the one hand, like it's a lottery ticket that there's some probability that in this cycle it will actually sort of revolutionize technology, maybe by the end of the decade or so, and that's a guessing game. Right? I don't know, 10% chance, I would say. Maybe by the end of the decade, we will have maybe useful quantum computers. I'm fairly optimistic on this, but I would say it's a good chance, like definitely non-zero, and I think that's pretty awesome. But what I know for sure is that it's an admission ticket to new discovery, to understanding the world better, and that certainly is good enough for me.
What a beautiful answer. Isn't that great? What you have heard is do it for curiosity. Do it for possibilities that might help the world, a new quantum revolution. Do it for science. Do it because it can let you measure and control things you've never done before. Did you hear from anyone? Do it because it helps today's world? Or you can actually build a bigger quantum computer to outspeed classical computers? No. And so what I'm doing in my work is trying to figure out an answer to that question. One of the frightening realities of quantum computers today is that quantum algorithms, there are very, very few of them, very few truly new quantum algorithms. It's really just down to phase estimation, which is a generalization of Shor's algorithm. I hope you all realize this concretely. All these other variants that do different forms of like nitrogenase quantum simulation, or you name it all, they're just variants of one algorithm, including Harrow-Hasidim-Lloyd for linear systems. That's a variation of Shor's algorithm as well. So one of the interesting stories that my group was able to discover last year is that Shor's algorithm, the simulation algorithm of Seth Lloyd and Richard Feynman, the search algorithm of Grover, which has a square root speed up, they're actually all the same single algorithm, literally, exactly, mathematically. And we have a paper called The Grand Unification of Quantum Algorithms. And each of these algorithms is described by a single vector of real numbers, phases, and the structure of the algorithm is exactly identical, and it is